Welcome back, everyone, to the final session, Seeds in Culture and Society. We will now hear from our contributed talks. We have 7 in total, and we will follow with a Q&A session at the end. So I encourage you all to place any questions in the chat or in the discussion forum, and we will read them out afterwards. So key topics that will be shared by our speakers this afternoon include how we can benefit from traditional knowledge, the importance of regional seed banks, as well as the importance of collaboration and partnership. So I'll pass you over to our first speaker, Sarah Jacob, who is from the University of Queensland, and she's going to talk to us about the diversity in wattle seeds for food applications. So thank you. Over to you.
Yeah. Just a second. Good evening. My name is Sarah Susan Jacob. I'm a PhD student with the ARC Centre for Uniquely Australian Food at the University of Queensland, and my PhD is in collaboration with Kath and Sheldon K. And today I'm going to be talking about exploring the diversity of wattle seeds for food applications. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional owners custodianship of the lands on which we meet and where the seeds for this project have been sourced. I pay my respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, and I recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities have been recognized as one of the oldest and healthiest civilizations in the world. For them, in addition to food being a source of nutrition, it was also a spiritual and social activity and a time for elders to pass on knowledge to the younger generations. With many communities following a mainly meat-based diet, it is now known that they also consumed over 200 different seeds, many of which were known to have been acacia seeds. So there are over 2,000 different varieties of acacia that are found across the globe. And interestingly, Australia actually holds 1/3 of this global diversity with over 900 varieties and close to 1,000, with the only common factor between them being the color of the seed coat. And it is this 1,000 varieties that are known as wattle seeds. Wattle seeds belong to the subgenus Heterophyllum, and after a lot of discussion and debate, now belong to the Fabaceae family and the Mimosaidae subfamily. This is also the family of the green pea, tamarind, and carob plants. They're found in almost every climatic condition across the Australian continent, from arid zones, temperate zones, and even tropical zones, and they truly epitomize the Australian landscape. So much so that the Acacia pycnantha is actually Australia's national floral emblem, and the green and gold of its foliage actually provided inspiration for Australia's official colors. Wattle seeds and acacias across the world have been studied and found to be rich in dietary fiber, and some wattle seeds have actually been speculated to have fatty acid profiles that are unique to acacias found in other parts of the world. And much like other seeds and legumes, they have an interesting micronutrient profile and a rich bioactive compound profile. They also are rich in protein content that ranges from 17 to 23% depending on the variety of the seed. In terms of seed structure, wattle seeds also have a unique property of both seeds and legumes. The seed coats have cells that are made up of palisade sclerites, and the inner cotyledon region, which is yellow, is separated from the seed coat in many species by the mesophile layer. Acacias also have an aril, which is the attachment of the seed to the pod, and the length and color of this aril determines what the seed look like and where it would be present upon maturity. Considering that wattle seeds were a popular source of food for many Aboriginal communities, there were many traditional methods of consumption, the most popular one being that they were roasted over hot coal. This method has been extensively studied, and it is found that this results in an extensive reduce in the amount of antinutrients, an evident change in protein structure, and an obvious flavor and aroma development. Another method of consumption was eating the seeds before they reached maturity, so they were eaten green. They were either steamed or eaten raw, straight out of the pod, much similar to how we would currently eat green peas. A much less documented method was extracting the arils from the seeds and fermenting this in water to create a drink. So wattle seeds are gaining popularity in the current food market, with many products being available that use roasted wattle seeds or alcohol extracts of roasted wattle seeds. So the aim of my presentation is to look at creating food applications that fully utilize the potential of wattle seeds, and I have 3 hypotheses that mainly focus on looking at the differences between varieties, the effect of different processing methods on nutritional outcomes, and different processing methods on sensory outcomes. And the results that would be discussed are focused on 3 different varieties that are harvested from the Northern Territory. And as you can see, there is a visual and physical difference between these varieties, and this was further corroborated by analytical methods that looked at their composition. Looking at microstructural changes during digestion, it was actually interesting to see that even after the intestinal phase, a lot of the cells in the wattle seed flour was not actually degraded even after most of the digestion process was complete. We also looked at 3 popular processing methods: dry roasting, boiling, and malting, simply because they are also popular methods with other seeds and legumes. Looking at this using scanning electron microscopy, it was also interesting to see that protein bodies that were generally trapped within the cell wall matrix for the raw seeds were actually no longer visible in the roasted seeds, possibly due to the change in structure due to the high temperature and time combination that is involved in roasting. We also looked at the complex aromas that form as a result of processing using a trained aroma panel. And interestingly, whole raw seeds actually had strong notes of chocolate, while when ground, they had strong notes of mango, and when dry roasted, had strong notes of peanuts. But when soaked and roasted, they actually had stronger notes of mild coconut and passion fruit. So these preliminary results actually tell us that there is indeed a lot of variety that exists between selected wattle seed species, and that processing does have varying effects on the characteristics of these seeds. In terms of what lies ahead, I have a lot of interesting experiments coming up that are mainly focused on continuing characterization of the seeds, looking at different processing methods and how to incorporate these into selected food matrices, and looking at how that would affect texture. I'd like to finish by acknowledging my advisors, my industry partner, Karen Sheldon Catering, the staff at Microscopy and Microanalysis, my colleagues and friends at Cooper's Plains and St. Lucia, particularly Adiamo, who kindly lent me some samples for this preliminary study. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. Today I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of the project we've been doing, looking at native grains as a food source. I acknowledge the co-authors on this project, and funding for the seed grant for this was from the Sydney Institute of Agriculture. I also acknowledge the country I'm presenting on from today, the Darug and Ku-ring-gai people on whose traditional lands I'm presenting, and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose traditional lands I usually work. This research was based on the Gamilaroi and Ngunnawal country in northwest New South Wales. It's home to one of the largest Aboriginal groups in Australia. They're very proudly known as the Grass People, which is very appropriate, and we were very proud to work with them. For more information on this project and the report from this work, there's the website for you to have a look at. What we wanted to do was gather information of paddock to plate value chain for native grains, including grass species. Everything from growing the plants to harvesting them, tricky points around threshing and milling the seed, creating food up through the marketing chain. This information was fed into an economic analysis of what it would be like or what sort of profit could be made if it's included into an agricultural system. Part of the creating food was looking at nutrient profiles, flour properties, baking qualities of the flour we produced. And the bit that I'll talk about today is germination of grass seed, including the importance of provenance and harvest conditions. Before I do that, I cannot resist but show you the kind of products we are working with. So in the top left-hand corner, that's the kind of flowers we were producing from different species. And you can see an acacia in there as well, linking to the last talk. And below that are the more traditional flowers that you may be used to, from quinoa, millet and wheat. Below that is some of the differences in the colour of the flowers that are produced. Spitfire is a common wheat variety, so we can see some lovely textures coming in there. And of course, we had enormous fun baking products. So these 2 breads contain 15% of native millet flour. That's what we found to be the optimum amount to keep bread qualities in place. Okay, so on to some seed germination. And again, I've got to thank a lot of honours students for this work. It's not groundbreaking work, but we're looking at it in the context of using native grains in an emerging food industry. There's a range of species. Some of them have edible seed that you can grind up into flour, and some of them don't. And with that, a range of germination responses from 100% down to some very low rates as well. Now, the importance of provenance I can show you here, pulling out kangaroo grass that we got from 2 different locations in Eastern Australia. Rates of germination were not very high in the best of times. You can see the various treatments that we added didn't really improve these all that much in terms of significance. Another provenance of kangaroo grass is also shown here, where the actual rates of germination, regardless of treatment, were also low. So this tells us that we've got to understand where seed comes from to get the best rates of germination. As much as we could, we tried to control for seed of the same age, same storage qualities and that sort of thing by sourcing from the same seed supplier. The next thing we wanted to look at is sort of harvesting methods. So we had 4 different collections, again, from the same seed suppliers. 2 of those collections were wild, hand collected, very energy and time consuming, and 2 of the seed sources were harvested by this actual particular machine. The treatments we applied as part of the project as well was smoke treatment from 3 different sources, eucalypt leaves, burning the trash from the thermida, and something completely different was burning pine. What we can see here is that the different harvesting mechanisms don't really significantly change rates of germination. Good thing to know is that machine harvesting doesn't really affect germination rates, which is good, maybe potentially even helping it along. And as a sideline, smoke treatment doesn't have an enormous effect either. The third experiment I want to show you stems from the common way of preparing ground paddocks for sowing native grass seed for pasture, or as we wanted to do, for seed production, for flour production. Commonly they're burnt to clear out weeds, old growth, and it's a great way to prepare the paddock. We collected some ash from different burnt areas, mixed it up with water and let it sit. And then the supernatant, we used that to prepare the water agar. And some of the Petri dishes were really quite dark. Another result that we want to show here, that it doesn't really matter where the ash comes from. It doesn't really increase germination, which is a shame, but then it doesn't actually decrease germination either. So a paddock that is not necessarily uniformly burnt will still allow some germination. That's a lot of information. We collected a lot of data and knowledge, but what we really found was the most important thing was the acknowledgement of the cultural significance of the plants we used and the land that we worked on, as well as including Indigenous awareness. Well, we wanted to also include local knowledge. We were very surprised that local landholders willing to share their properties for potentially putting in grass seeds for seed and flour production. We learned the most important thing is, regardless of what other information we found out, the most important thing is involving local Aboriginal communities in all aspects of project design, from the initial setup through to management, and if this ever gets off the ground, through to seed and flour production. Of course, our ultimate aim from this research long-term is for Aboriginal communities to benefit from the research we do by establishing native grass and grain enterprises as an opportunity to generate economic and social opportunities. Something we haven't done yet is applied the 10 principles of Indigenous knowledge, as we heard from Terry earlier in this session, and that's something we should do. So thank you for listening, and I should pass on to the next presenter.
Okay, hi everyone. Hopefully this is working. My name's Tanya Luc, and I work at Seeding Victoria as their sales and partnerships coordinator. And today I'd like to speak to you about the importance of regional seed banks. So just to contextualize, this is a graphic prepared by the Project Phoenix folks, and it describes the native seed conservation sector. And you can see here that land care groups, community groups, associations and not-for-profits, this is where the seed banks sit, and this is a bit relevant for later on as I go through the presentation. Oh, also, I would like to, I forgot, I'm sorry, to acknowledge that, of course, I'm speaking from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. This presentation is a lot to do with what Costa was talking about at the very beginning. It's a lot to do with partnerships. So I'm excited to share with you some of those. So excuse, it's a bit text heavy, but with the picture here, this is our seed bank. Sorry, a cool room. So we're a restoration seed bank rather than a conservation seed bank. A conservation seed bank is very much focused on threatened species and very much within the Botanic Gardens network, whereas we sit more in the revegetation sector. So our mission, we've been going since the 90s, is to deliver appropriately sourced Indigenous seed for revegetation works throughout Western Victoria and also into southern New South Wales. When we say appropriately sourced, it's because we follow the Flora Bank guidelines, and we have done so for many years. Yeah, we really pride ourselves on our ethics in our collection and also in how we treat and deal with the seeds. So we've got 270 species in our seed bank in total. Again, being a restoration seed bank, 2/3 are eucalypt and acacia. So we're really about getting habitat out in the ground. Seeding Victoria is actually an amalgamation of 3 seed banks: the Ballarat Region Seed Bank, Murray Mallee, and the Wimmera. We have over 80 seed collectors in our current service area, and we also do education and training, a bit of TAFE, land care, school groups, and provide advice on suitable species and project management. Here we've got one of our volunteers, Gail, sorry, her back's to you, and Dan, who is our seed bank manager. So when we're looking at the state of restoration seed banks in Victoria, we need to look at the context of what's been going on in Victoria. So early on in the 2000s, maybe up to 2010, there were large-scale multi-year projects, big amount of environmental funding, and a lot of the focus was on revegetation, creating habitat. And this involved the use of direct seeding. Restoration seed banks are, even though we supply to nurseries, we're very much about direct seeding. And the picture here is some beautiful mixed direct seeding growing beautifully at Walmer, which is in Castlemaine. That era was also characterised by thriving land care groups and really strong coordination and funding by the CMAs. So then we come to now, okay? So, and this would have been similar when my colleagues Dan and Christy attended the conference back in 2016, same sort of pressures. The focus by government and CMAs on enhancement and protection of existing remnants rather than on direct seeding has meant that there's been a massive decrease in the demand for seed for restoration. And today we're in an interesting situation where people like Cassinia Environmental, Paul Detman, is actually our biggest client, and we're really grateful for their for them buying lots of seed off us, which is fantastic. So what happens when you see a massive decline in the amount of funding available in the conservation sector? So we had 8 seed banks in Victoria in 2010, and now really it's just down to 3. So 3, that's including Seeding Victoria. So the South Gippsland Seed Bank is very, very small. You'll see there Thursdays 9 till 12 is the only time that they're open. And the picture there is myself and some of the excellent women, the staff that work at the Goulburn Broken Indigenous Seed Bank, which is out at Euroa. We've been making a lot of effort to connect with the other not-for-profit seed banks to find out what kind of pressures and challenges are being faced, and exploring ways that we could work together. I just wanted to give an example on what happens when regional seed banks shut down. So when you go from 8 to just 3 seed banks, you're talking about a very different coverage, and it has practical ramifications. It compromises your provenance, local adaptation of what seeds are available, and it also has a detrimental effect on our collector network. So what this map shows here is Creswick is where our Ballarat Region Seed Bank is based, and Naya up at the top is where our Murray Mallee Seed Bank is based. That seed bank is out of action at the moment. We're applying for funding to get a new cool room. And what that means is that the collectors who would normally have supplied to Naya now have to travel a 3.5-hour journey one way and then back again to drop off seeds. And this is in an environment which isn't really, I guess, with a lot of projects not on the cards, it's just not a very attractive proposition for your collectors. So there's a real big interest in keeping regional seed banks dotted around the landscape. I'm going to go through now just quickly and talk about some of our facilities and what we do. And bear in mind that the 3 seed banks that are in operation at the moment in Victoria, the not-for-profit ones, we're all working on basically skeleton staff and skeleton funding. We are all ready to scale back up if the funding climate changes. We're doing about 1/2 ton per year of seed distribution, and at our peak we're up at 2 to 3 tons. This is our drying shed. It's quite big, and there's Robert, one of our staff, and Gail, and they're doing the very time-consuming and laborious task of cleaning Banksia seeds. We also, here's our education. If we had baseline funding, for example, we'd be able to have a greater diversity of species collected. We'd have more time for germination testing, and we'd have more time for our education. Both Dan and I are in a very part-time role, and it's the same at the other seed banks. Seed production areas are increasingly identified as very, very important for the future. We have seed production areas of these species, and we're looking at doing more. But again, with funding, we could be able to achieve so much more in this area. Another thing that came up recently, luckily we haven't been near the areas that were hit by the Black Summer megafires, but we are experiencing storms. And so in the Wombat Forest, we had a huge event. That forest that you can see there, that was actually thick forest. Most of it was blown down by severe winds. We collected some 15 kilos of eucalypt seed, but with the right funding, we would be able to do a much more, I guess, concerted response to collect seed in the event of a disaster like a windstorm. The other thing that is also would be very beneficial for baseline funding, for example, is that we can improve how we, the time that we have for our partnerships and our shared projects. The Federation CERDI, the Centre for E-Research and Digital Innovation, they are massive supporters of us, and they developed our online database and also host our website. And we've got a seed production area at the BirdLife Australia Clarksdale Bird Sanctuary, and we're looking increasingly at working with Indigenous groups. The other, like Cassini Environmental that I mentioned before, is one of our biggest clients. We've also got an MOU with Carbon Landscape. So there are emerging markets, that's for sure. There's a lot of talk about, with the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, and also targets for the Department of for the state government, that there will be increased demand, but at the moment we live on the just on the sale of seeds alone. So what do we do? So Greening Australia and Project Phoenix have doing some amazing work on creating a peak body for the native seed sector, which will also include an online marketplace, but this will take time. So what we're going to be doing is, because we've been, it's a funny situation, not-for-profits, we're not for profit, yet most of us live just on the sale of seeds in a very uncertain market. So we need to explore new markets, possibly subscriptions like community supported agriculture, and also apply for grant funding. So it's an exciting time to be a seed bank, but I don't want to see any more seed banks closed down in Victoria, because I think to lose all of that knowledge and experience and understanding would be a real shame. Okay, thank you.
Hello and welcome. My name is Jessie Raneng, and today I am representing the Centre for Planetary Health, Food Security at Griffith University on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. I will be presenting to you a brief overview of the research Professor Catherine Pickering and I are currently working on. Our research is looking to update a previous review and research further into the growth of community gardens as ex situ dynamic seed banks. Before we get started today, I would like to acknowledge all traditional custodians of the land from which I live and work. I also would like to pay respects to the unceded lands of the Yugambeh region in southeastern Queensland, and especially Kumari elders past, present and emerging. A key review of English academic literature on community gardens conducted by Guja et al. In 2012 highlighted important gaps which form a grounding basis for our research. The review found that there was an increase in popularity of community gardens, as well as a diverse range of benefits they provide for local communities and surrounding environments. The review also found that existing literature focused mostly on these benefits rather than conservation and agrobiodiversity characteristics that the gardens may possess. Increasing interest in community gardens has played a role in dynamic off-site conservation of genetic diversity amongst flora. Further research conducted by Guja et al. In 2015 found that almost all of the 50 community gardens in southeastern Queensland practice dynamic conservation of heritage plants. These gardens supported the concept of seed sharing and also selected varieties that were better suited to non-industrial agricultural practices. We have already found that at least 40 more community gardens have been established since the previous study, and only 2 of the original gardens have closed. Since the previous review, a preliminary study has found an additional 1,025 published articles. This demonstrates not only an increase in the popularity of community gardens, but also a dramatic increase in the associated literature. Despite these increases, the previous reviews have identified gaps in the literature related to food security and agrobiodiversity conservation potential of community gardens. To address this ongoing lacuna, our research will expand on the previous work by conducting a scientific analysis on recent literature and updating, resurveying, and adding the newly established gardens into our data collection and analysis. This survey will include documenting the social cultural practices related to seed sharing, documenting the types and purpose of seed storing and saving, assessing how climate change may be influencing their plant selection and growing practices, and assessing the diversity of what is grown and why. I would like to take the time to thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact.
Hi everyone, I'm Damian Wrigley and I'm the National Coordinator of the Australian Seed Bank Partnership. I'm here to tell you about who we are and the work that we do. I wanted to first acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people on whose country I'm coming to you from today. So the partnership is governed by the Council of Heads of Australian Botanic Gardens, which is comprised of major capital city botanic gardens throughout Australia. The role of the National Coordinator has been hosted by the Australian National Botanic Gardens since 2010. The partnership is made up of 13 partners and many more associates who collaborate on national and subnational projects to support the ex situ conservation of Australia's native flora, as well as to undertake research and support the translocation and reintroduction of species held in our collections, including the use of Australia's crop wild relatives and gene banks. Our vision is a future where Australia's native plant diversity is valued, understood, and conserved for the benefit of all. Our partners undertake a significant number of projects in collaboration with other organisations. However, as a partnership, we completed 2 major long-term collecting projects between 2011 and 2020, as well as a number of smaller projects with targeted focus of biosecurity and crop wild relatives. Over 1,500 taxa new to seed banks were secured through partnership projects during the decade, and they've contributed to the almost 20,000 collections held across the network, with 10,000 duplicated at the Millennium Seed Bank in the UK. So our current work since the bushfires of 1920, we've had a strong focus on bushfire recovery, and we gratefully acknowledge the funding support from the Australian Government, Project Phoenix, the UK Government and the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership of the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew in the UK, and WWF Australia, as well as the partner institutions that invest in their facilities and the generous individuals who have donated to the partnership during this time. So we've focused on making collections where sufficient seed is available, ensuring the replenishment of a soil seed bank is prioritised. And we're using these collections to establish germination protocols for collections that are new to seed banks, as well as testing our older collections to ensure the storage methodologies are sufficient for maintaining the viability of our collections longer term. So our partners are also contributing to translocations and restoration of threatened species in target areas. But there is still more that's needed in the years ahead to ensure we're capturing species that aren't available in the years immediately following a fire, particularly in areas where the fires are of such high intensity. So part of our bushfire recovery efforts is to undertake rapid flora assessments while our partners are out in the field. This methodology was adapted by Gavin Phillips from some methodology that was being used and developed in New South Wales, and it was further refined by our partners for deployment in the field during their post-bushfire collecting. So the data from these assessments will be used by partners to prioritise future collecting efforts and also to help inform future bushfire planning and the response when it comes to ex situ seed conservation and research. This data will be made available for those working in plant conservation if you're interested, and we're also going to make a subset available on our website with location information de-identified. So our partners are incredibly generous with their knowledge and expertise, and they're always willing to share with others across government, business and the community. They work closely with land managers, private citizens, land care organisations and Indigenous groups to improve outcomes for Australia's flora. With seed scientists across every state and territory, the partnership provides a unique opportunity for seed conservation to contribute to national policy and programs as one of the many tools needed to support our native flora from the many threats facing them today. So our last business plan wrapped up last year. We'll soon be releasing our new partnership strategy, which will guide us in the decade ahead. So following consultations across the partnership in recent years, we'll continue to focus on improving the genetic diversity of collections held in seed banks and improving the usability of those collections, so making them available for research or for restoration, as well as ensuring our work aligns with broader efforts to halt biodiversity loss and improve access to data and information, particularly on collections and germination. So our databases across the partners are all separate, although we're working to integrate those and collate the information in 22 as much as we possibly can. We're also continuing to make opportunities to engage with Indigenous Australians part of our projects this year. This is including greater engagement with Indigenous land managers, a new position at the Plant Bank in New South Wales for an Indigenous seed collector, and working with them throughout the worst impacted areas in South East Australia. So, as part of our next steps, we're looking to do a future review and research, a review of our collections held in our seed banks. So post-conference, this will be looking at the representativeness of our collections. So possible areas of focus will include taxonomic and functional groups, how are we doing on genetic diversity and provenance of our collections, and also what germplasm types do we have in the collections, and what's the collection sizes for the different species we hold. We'll also be looking at the functionality of those collections. So this will help us to understand across the partnership what we already know and what we don't. What is the knowledge we hold on the viability of our collections, as well as our knowledge and information on the germination protocols and storage requirements for those already held, and where do we need to continue to focus our efforts. We'll also be looking at the value of our collections. So this will give us a better understanding across the partnership. What does it cost us to establish these incredible collections? And what would the likely replacement cost be? We'll also try and look at the ecological value of our collections and what might be needed to fill the gaps and maintain these in the longer term. So this work will include all of our collection facilities, and it will be led by Dr. Kath Offord, Dr. David Merritt, and Dr. Lydia Guja. And where necessary, we'll be looking to work with others across our network to contribute to the review. So lastly, I'd just like to say that our ability to continue our work is down to the organisations and individuals that dedicate their time and expertise to support the collective. Our partners deliver incredible results, and this is shown through their research outputs, the reliance on their expertise by government and business for the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve for Australia's native flora. So the partners have built trust and respect with one another over many years, and they do genuinely share their expertise willingly. Of course, the role of a coordinator can be helpful for providing a focal point for engaging with the partnership as a collective. Sorry, I've just got to go back one. So we could not do our work without the help of our volunteers, our funders and our hosts. Our volunteers are helping across seed banks throughout the country to collect in the field, to clean the seed that we collect. They help to undertake germination trials, document collections, maintain our data, help with information, images and websites. And we really couldn't do it without you. I'd also like to thank the Council of Heads of Australian Botanic Gardens for their support and the support of their institutions for ex situ seed science, as well as the Australian National Botanic Gardens for hosting the coordinator and the secretariat for the partnership. And lastly, I'd like to thank the partners and the associates. You're a phenomenal group of people, and I know how privileged I am to get to do the job that I do, and I'm so proud to be able to represent you every day. Thank you for everything you do.
Hello everyone again. Sorry about those difficulties before. I'll take off from where I left off and thank you, Damian, who talked just before. As I was saying, I'm going to be talking about seed banking in national parks and how I've come to the view that they're not just an ideal conservation partnership, they're an essential conservation partnership. So why are these partnerships become essential? The threat of climate change has meant that even on our largest reserves, they will experience climate change over the coming years, putting much of our iconic species at risk. And just as a couple of examples, Caroline Chong talked earlier this morning about the threats facing Christmas Island, but also like to mention that Kakadu National Park, our iconic wetland areas are at risk of inundation from saline sea level rise. And Uluru Katajuda National Park will experience fire regimes more frequently and feral animal increase in feral animal risks. So to address these threats, we're working at the National Seed Bank more closely towards an ecosystem stewardship to give us all the options we need for conservation. And that means working more closely with our traditional custodians who have knowledge of country and holistic land management. But also driving that is our work with park management, their in situ management and monitoring of ecosystems and individual species and controlling threats on country. And then what we can provide as seed banks to that partnership, ensuring that the material that we collect is fit for use across parks. As part of that tool of resilience, we needed to identify priorities. And Parks Australia came up with a prioritisation tool that not only identified threatened species, but in consultation with traditional custodians and land managers, identified significant species that, if we lose them, will have a profound effect on our landscapes. So what seed banks do, I'm sure most of you are aware of this, is that we're collecting seed, we're storing seed long-term in appropriate storage conditions. We're gathering the data on that seed, but we're also monitoring the collections as they're stored, ensuring that that what we're storing is then able to be used in either research, and the research is there for us to understand the seed and seedling biology, but then to also make sure that that material is also fit for use in species recovery and making sure we can get threatened species back on country. So I'm just going to talk about two case studies quite briefly. First one in Uluru-Kata National Park, which is down in Central Australia. And then the second one in Kakadu National Park in the top end of Northern Territory. So Uluru-Kata, we worked on Santalum acuminatum, which is known by the Anangu custodians as Mangata, or to most of you maybe as Kwandong. It has significant cultural value to the Anangu people of Uluru. It's a well-known food source for them and across southern Australia as well. It's listed in the Northern Territory as vulnerable. And within the park, it's at the northern end of its range, and there's only 14 individuals remaining. It's threatened by feral herbivores such as camels and rabbits, but also changing fire regimes and wildfire due to weeds such as bufflegrass. So it's a species that's difficult to germinate. It has a physical seed dormancy. It's a hemiparasite and needs a host to survive. And within the park, as I said, there's only 14 individuals, which means it's got a reduced gene pool, leading to low germination vigor and seedling vigor. So what we tried to do at the National Seed Bank was develop a protocol for germination that could then be used back on park. The protocol involved as using an after ripening and rapid wet dry cycle and fracturing the woody endocarp. Germinating the seed then on sphagnum moss in incubators at 15 to 18 degrees in full darkness over 3 weeks to 3 months. And after that time, we achieved 50% germination. Those seedlings then went up to our nursery here at AMBG to be grown on with acacia hosts. So in writing up those protocols, we were able to deliver them to the Anangu and park managers for them to use and grow Mangata on country. Second case study is situated in Kakadu National Park, and it deals with crop wild relatives. And Sal Norton talked about this morning as well. So I won't cover so much ground. But just to say, we were working with Mirror women on country in Kakadu National Park and learning from them on the species that we were working with, primarily those crop wild relatives such as rice and sorghum, understanding growth stages and using language that they use for those stages of growth and how they harvest those species as well. In return, we delivered training and materials to Kakadu, namely the Blue Drum Kit developed by the Millennium Seed Bank to create local mini seed banks on park and help the traditional custodians store and save seed for themselves, but also assist us as the National Seed Bank in our collections to store seed under appropriate conditions short term. So just in summary, encapsulating what we're trying to do is within an ecosystem stewardship is for that conservation to be driven by traditional custodians. And we're learning and listening from them, to them, on how to assist on-country conservation, especially with our threatened species, but also, as I mentioned, species of significance. We're building capacity for our Commonwealth parks to store seed collections under appropriate storage conditions and to be able to monitor those collections appropriately as well for monitor their viability. We're also providing training in adequate documentation and record keeping for the future use of those collections, because without that documentation, we can't scientifically use those collections. And to make those collections fit for use, we're ensuring collecting the genetic breadth by sampling appropriately across all populations for those species. So thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge the Anangu and Mirror peoples on Uluru and Kakadu, the National Seed Bank staff and volunteers, Caroline Chong, Ben Worth, Sal Norton and Ben McCormack for their assistance. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kate Hardwick and I'm the Conservation Partnership Coordinator for Asia for the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership based at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. My co-authors are Aisha Farouk and Eleanor Bremen, also from Kew, and Damian Wrigley from the Australian Seed Bank Partnership, who you just heard from. We've been looking at the potential for a new conservation network, a seed conservation network for Asia, Australia and the Pacific. So the big question is, do we need another network? Networks surround us in modern life. We all recognise their power to bring together people and organisations with common interests, goals or needs. And this generally enables achievements beyond the scope of any one person or organisation. So people say the whole is worth more than the sum of its parts. And this principle has been widely applied in global communications and social media, but also in conservation, and specifically in conservation seed banking. And so we've already shown through various initiatives like the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership and the Australian Seed Bank Partnership that connecting seed banking communities from the global to the regional to the national level improves our conservation outcomes. So some of the benefits of networks are shown here, and you can see them as falling into two main areas. So firstly, the benefits of having a shared platform for purposes such as disseminating best practice, advice, publicity for events or jobs, etc., organising regional capacity building, that kind of thing. And a good example is the Centre for Plant Conservation in America, which has a really good and very active online forum called the Rare Plant Academy, where members can read best practice, watch videos, and connect with experts in real time to ask questions. And secondly, there's the benefit of working collectively. So both internal benefits, such as the opportunity for joint fundraising, but it can also increase our impact externally by giving members a collective mandate and thus a louder voice in conservation issues. So a nice example is shown here from South Africa's Fynbos Forum, which among many other achievements successfully campaigned to prevent the development of this critically endangered Elgin shale fynbos in the 1990s. So with the advantages of networking applied to the seed banks of Asia, Australia and the Pacific. So So this region covers a vast area of the world, including no less than 15 biodiversity hotspots and lots of other really high value conservation areas. But it's experienced rapid economic growth and huge habitat loss recently, and has seen a huge surge in seed conservation. So, for example, during the last 10 years, new seed banks have been set up in Thailand and Korea. The National Seed Bank of Indonesia has expanded, and seed banks in Bhutan and Malaysia have broadened their scope from agricultural to native species. But are these seed banks working in isolation? Could a network help facilitate their work? Could it also help to coordinate their conservation activities in the region? So conservation activities of seed banks include some of these projects shown here, such as the ex situ conservation of a wide range of species, from the wild relatives of crop plants to trees, that's the Global Tree Seed Bank project, to threatened plant species, the Threatened Biodiversity Hotspots project. And there's no doubt that working together plays an invaluable role in safeguarding wild plant species from extinction, and even more importantly, making native seeds available for conservation and research. So these first two examples shown here show how multiple partners have collaborated to deliver training and conservation action to help, in the first one, fight myrtle rust in New Zealand, and in the second, to conserve crop wild relatives in Australia, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. And on the third example, after the catastrophic bushfires in Australia, joint action from the Millennium Seed Bank and the Australian Seed Bank partnerships helped to leverage funding from the Garfield Weston Foundation and the UK government to conduct emergency seed collecting to help restore devastated areas. So long-term partnerships like this can assist with implementing both rapid and long-term responses following disasters, enabling better planning and outcomes for long-term conservation. So let's take a quick look at some of the existing global seed banking networks. So the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership, or MSBP, which we've mentioned, includes more than 200 organisations from over 95 different countries and territories. The MSBP provides services such as duplicating seed storage, capacity building, data sharing for all the partners, as well as organising and supporting fundraising for joint conservation and research projects. The MSBP is managed by the World Botanic Gardens Kew and operates on a system of individual bilateral agreements between Kew and partner organisations. Botanic Gardens Conservation International, or BGCI, runs the Global Seed Conservation Challenge, and this programme aims to support botanic gardens across the world to do seed banking by sharing advice, information, online training, and it also awards prizes for seed conservation. And thirdly, the IUCN Seed Conservation Specialist Group has over 100 members in over 25 countries. So this relatively new network is supported by both BGCI and the IUCN Species Survival Commission. And although it has some external funding, it does depend very much on voluntary contributions of time from experts. And it provides an online directory of expertise and lots of other online resources. Now let's have a look at a couple of regional and national seed banking networks. So in Europe, the European Native Seed Conservation Network, or ENSCONET, has 32 members who collaborate with each other on seed conservation activities and research and restoration. They meet once a year in person or online, and they have a website with online resources. So they received an initial startup grant from the European Union, but the network is now managed by the Millennium Seed Bank at Kew, running on a minimal budget provided by membership fees. So you'll have just heard from Damian Wrigley about the Australian Seed Bank Partnership in the previous talk, so I won't go into much detail about that here, other than to say that the partnership has grown out of many years of collaboration. As a formal network with national coordination, the partnership's able to influence both local and national plant conservation policies, and it can also attract funding for strategic projects that help to address the most pressing needs facing the Australian flora. So, would the work of seed banks in Asia, Australia and the Pacific be easier and more effective if they were part of a regional network? Would such a network complement or duplicate existing local and international networks? Is there a desire for a new network for this region? And if so, what would it look like? What would it do and who would run it? So if you have views on these questions and would like to contribute to the discussion, please come along to our discussion workshop on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Canberra time. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for a fantastic set of talks. We will now move on to the Q&A session where we've been joined by some of our presenters. We've got here Sarah, Tanya, Tina and Kate. We already have a few questions that have come in and as we're a bit over time I will jump into them. So firstly, a question for you, Tanya. Is the decrease in non-for-profit seed banks mirrored by an increase in the number of the commercial seed supply sector?
My seed bank manager and also David King, who is on our board, and our feeling is that there's been a general decline overall in the industry, just in terms of that shift from moving away from broad-scale revegetation projects. So yeah, it's also because it's such a quite a hidden industry. It's quite a hard question to answer because even if you do a desktop search, it's quite hard to get the information that you need. You actually need to go around and ring people and take quite a bit of time to answer a question like that.
Thank you for that. There's another two questions from separate people, but they're kind of linked. So Gemma asks to Tanya also, are there any ways that conservation seed banks could support the work of restoration seed banks? And similarly, the other question is, would it be of value to deposit duplicates of collections to some of the national seed banks for long-term storage and conservation?
Yeah, sure. They're fantastic questions as well. So the first one, working with conservation seed banks, it would, of course, we really be interested in collaboration. We really want to promote the idea that seed banks are a fundamental part of native vegetation restoration. It does sound like a no-brainer, but often when revegetation plans are put forth by government, they seem to overlook this critical resource. So I think if it could help our visibility, that would be fantastic. The other thing is it's just helping us make sure our standards are up to scratch as well, and that interplay. With the answer to that question and also the next one, it really comes down to staff time. We are so into collaborating and sharing and having duplicate seeds in conservation banks and working more closely. However, we need funded projects that actually fund another day in the seed bank to do that work or to answer those emails or to make sure we've got the appropriate metadata for all those seeds that are going across. So really, we're ready to go. It's just a capacity issue. Yeah, so I'm happy to hear about any ideas people have.
Thank you. I have a question for Tina. Some very interesting work on native grasses. I was just wondering, does the traditional knowledge regarding their use, growth and harvest and even consumption of the native grains, does it change much across the region and across Indigenous groups? And would this pose any challenges with the uptake and use into modern systems and food markets?
That's a great question, and I guess it's very hard to answer because a lot of that knowledge is not documented. It's only really when you get to know the communities on the ground that, and you build trust, that they'll share that information. So I suspect yes, but maybe we'll never know that. Well, until we get good collaboration across a lot of different areas.
Yeah, so feeding into that, and Sarah, you can also jump into, so looking into the future, how far away do you see us from seeing such products being commercially available? I know that in Sarah's talk on the wattle seeds, it's actually getting quite common. But how far do you really think that we're away from seeing this?
I think we're pretty close because a lot of people actually know about a lot of native plants and seeds and fruits right now. So there is a large growing market for food that actually incorporates native plants into them. So yeah, we actually have a lot of PhD students at our center who are researching growing markets for native plants. So yeah, I think it's closer than we think it is.
That's great. I've just had a quick look. There is no more questions coming through. Do any of the speakers have a question for anyone else? Any of the other speakers on the Q&A before we close the session? No, all good. Well, that brings us to the end of our session. So thank you once again to all the speakers for their presentations and the delegates for their questions. This is the end of today's Seeds in Culture and Society and almost the end of day 2. So I'll now hand over to Cathy, Sally and Lydia for the conference synthesis. So thank you, everyone.
Hello. It's the end of day 2, as Kath just said, and it's now our role to bring the speakers conference part of the conference to a close. So I'd like to congratulate all of the presenters today, and you may be able to see yourself on this collage that Brad Desmond's put together for us, and we've had a fantastic speakers program. And I think you'll all agree that this has been a really great forum for sharing our collective knowledge on the understanding and the uses of seeds. So now with the help of the rapporteurs, I've summarised the general findings of all the talks from each session and identified the emerging themes. So yesterday, Monday morning, we explored the theme of seed biology and evolutionary ecology. And we were treated to an excellent overview of the topic of biological scaling in seed functional components by Si-Chong Chen. And it's studies like this one that are improving our understanding of plant reproductive strategies. Si-Chong's talk was then followed by 23 talks and poster presentations. And these all demonstrated how the study of seed traits is contributing to our understanding of plant reproductive strategies and how these are driving species distribution under climate change. And then further, how we will manage species under climate change and looking at fire management regimes. There were several studies that highlighted understudied but clearly important areas for research, such as the role of ploidy in seed germination, as well as the understanding of the seed microbiome, which is relatively well understood in the agricultural species, but is fairly unstudied for restoration, and it's an exciting emerging theme to come out of this conference. On Monday afternoon, we kicked off the seed sourcing and end use session with a very insightful talk by Robert Henry, which brought us up to speed with the incredible leaps forward and the rapid recent advances in genomic analysis technologies, And these are allowing the application of genomic analysis to the collection and use of genetic resources. The technology is becoming increasingly important to the rapid identification of genetic and the molecular basis for important plant traits. And this will greatly enhance our ability to manipulate these traits in breeding and production. Conservation of and utilisation of Australian plant resources in crop improvement and climate change, and a whole raft of other things that these are genomic advances are contributing to. A major take-home message from Robert's talk was his call out to us, to the seed community, to begin to sequence the genome of all species, which will give us so much information for what is a relatively small amount of investment. This was reinforced by a talk by Marlene van der Merwe, who highlighted the use of this technology for understanding seed sampling strategies that are required to capture diversity in collection of native species. And she recommended that we also keep maternal lines separate to enable investigative studies. Other emerging themes from this session, from the following 14 presentations, were around the development of the seed industry accreditation schemes and how this might be achieved across Australia. Also, we saw the emergence of the science and practice based guidelines that have been launched in the last, the Flora Bank was last launched a couple of weeks ago. And of course, we launched the germplasm guidelines this morning. And this all brings together the collaboration and sharing between the seed banks and the incredible scaling up of restoration that's occurred across Australia and indeed across our region, our near neighbours in Asia and the South Pacific to some extent. So it's highlighted the need that we not only need to produce large amounts of seeds, but these seeds need to be able to germinate and to establish. And we also need to increase the diversity of species that are being made available through restoration programs. Then this morning in the seed and gene bank management session, we had the privilege to be taken through the workings of the Australian Grains Gene Bank by Sal Norton, and Eleanor Brennan took us through the workings of the Millennium Seed Bank. And we had the opportunity in that session to compare the common and the differing purposes of those seed banks, leading to a discussion of how gene banks can learn from each other. There were a number of talks that showed the diversity of seed banks across our regions and indeed across the world, and their various purposes. And this included presentations from Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Japan and China. And other talks in this session revealed the increase in work around cryopreservation, particularly of exceptional species, that it's possible to now start to implement cryostorage into germplasm storage for many species as part of our workflows. But we do need to continue to investigate the requirements for poorly understood species. There were other technological advances that were discussed, like understanding the factors relating to poor seed storage behaviour, and the development of a predictor key to determine storage behaviour. Seed identification tools are expected to be further developed into the future. There was also a couple of presentations around digitisation and imaging, and the hot topic of machine learning came up, and these talks looked at these emerging technologies and how these will help with identification and management of seeds and seed banks. And now in this final session this afternoon, we had 3 extraordinary keynote presentations that helped us to understand and navigate the appropriate use of seeds and other germplasm. So Terry Janke discussed the True Tracks protocols as a framework for Indigenous engagement. Brad Sherman helped us to understand and hopefully negotiate the Nagoya Protocol and address some of the uncertainty about how to use that and how we could take that forward. And then Ola Westigan showed us how seed banks working together can safeguard crop diversity. And he described in great detail, and I think we had quite an outpouring of emotion really around the rescue and the reconstitution of the ICARA seed bank, and how the global seed banking has contributed to restoring national seed banks. Then there were some talks and posters in that session which gave us varying examples of the way that germplasm and Indigenous knowledge are being used for developing new crops. And finally, we looked at the ways that will further create strong partnerships that are vital to the future of germplasm conservation. And sorry, this slide here sums up those emerging directions. So I think the ones that really stand out for me are the role of the microbiome in seed function, the increasing banking of exceptional species, the increasing application of cryotechnology, more efficient gene banking, technologies being used for gene banking, the incredible scale at which restoration is being undertaken, and the huge challenges that's bringing to those efforts, and of course, how we can work with seeds, traditional knowledge, and to develop strong partnerships. So I think these are the strong emerging themes across seed science and seed practice in agriculture and restoration. So the program findings from this conference and the emerging themes that have come out of it will be captured in a special issue of Australian Journal of Botany, which members of the committee will start working on after the conference. And many of you indicated that you would be willing to have your work considered for Australian Journal of Botany, or for the conservation journal, Australasian Plant Conservation. The Australian Journal of Botany special seed science special issue will be headed up by Mark Uwe, who's a very experienced editor of in seed journal publication. So our committee will look at the reviews and the talks and the abstracts, and it's a project that will take some time, at least another year, to get as many publications as we can into the journals. So I just wanted to make mention before I hand over to Lydia that we're only finished day 2 of this conference. We've now got, tomorrow we have a workshop for storing and, caring of seed collections, followed up on the next day by the FENA conference on the environment, which is around conserving exceptional species and using techniques like cryopreservation. And then on Friday, those of us who have to wrangle statistics are going to get a really fantastic workshop on how to use R for your seed your seed data. And I urge you, if you haven't already registered for any of those workshops, they are still open and can be registered now. So I'm going to hand over to Lydia to make some announcements. Thank you.
Thanks, Kath. So I get the really fun job of making some announcements. It has been an amazing program, which Kath's just covered off so brilliantly in a short amount of time. One thing that's really stood out to the committees is the really high quality work that we've seen from students and early career researchers. In the background, we've had committee members scoring the student and ECR talks and posters, the ones that they weren't co-authors for. And there's very hotly contested first positions for the best poster, the best 3-minute oral and the best 8-minute oral. And I'm really pleased to announce Amy, Ella and Susan as the winners of those prizes. Congratulations to all of you for brilliant presentations. Yes, round of applause. So you'll be receiving, as soon as it's hot off the press, the print edition of the germplasm guidelines that was launched today, but also some sets of stamps and stickers and a collector's item of the first day issue of the Seed Bank Partnership set of Australia Post stamps that came out a little while ago. So you can write to all your friends and family and tell them about the prizes you've won. So that's one announcement. Just before making the next one, would really like to thank everybody for attending the conference. On behalf of the Australian National Botanic Gardens, we've been really honoured to be able to host this, even if it did end up having to be virtual. It's been great the way that that's opened up the conference to a lot more participants. We hope that maybe one day when our new seed bank's up and running, we might have another chance to host you in person again. And it's with really great pleasure that I able to announce the hosts for the next Australasian Seed Science Conference, which will be the Australian Grains Gene Bank. So over to Sal to tell us all about those plans.
Thanks, Lydia. So I'll be really looking forward to the 2025 Australasian Seed Science Conference, which we are planning to host as a face-to-face hybrid with online content as well. For those that don't know, Horsham is in Western Victoria. We're about 3.5 hours outside of Melbourne, so it's a great regional area to have a conference. There's lots of areas out and visit. The next conference program, we're expecting it to be similar to this program, scientific program, workshops and field trips at the local area. So we've got some lovely national parks in the area. We've got the Grampians, we've got Arapalis with a wide range of biodiversity, lots of orchids, community-based projects. We've got an Indigenous organisation, Native Plant Nursery up the road that we're hoping to get involved with the next conference as well as tours of the agricultural related in terms of the Australian Grains Gene Bank and the agricultural field site. So looking forward to 2025. So forward to seeing you then. So I will now hand over to Damian Wrigley to do the final close and housekeeping for the conference.
Thanks, Kath, Sal and Lydia. That was great. Just a very quick wrap up because I know we're already running over time. Thank you to Sal and the Australian Grains Gene Bank and the Victorian Government for your generous offer to host the conference in 2025. It's very much appreciated. I really do hope we'll be able to join you in person in Horsham. Looking forward to it. Just a reminder about the workshops. They won't be on this platform. They will be on Zoom. So check your emails. You should have got some emails from ASSC this afternoon. If not, they'll come through this evening. So definitely joining on Zoom, not on this platform. I just wanted to also just do a little bit of housekeeping. Thanks for all your sharing and posting on social media. It's been great to see the positivity that's out there. I just wanted to also thank our special guests, our keynotes, the delegates, chairs, rapporteurs, organising committee and scientific committee, including Brad for keeping us all organised. I also want to thank the AMPC for sharing their launch of the germplasm guidelines with us this morning. I'd also like to thank Amy, Katie, Ben and the team at ASSC for your help with the conference. We really appreciate it. I just wanted to give a bit of a shout out to all of our sponsors. We really do appreciate all the help you've given us it's absolutely essential to helping us to run this conference. Thank you to our hosts. And please join us tonight for the trivia night on Gathertown at 6 o'clock with Nathan Emery, and for some social networking. We're looking forward to having you there, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the workshops for the rest of the week. Thanks very much, everyone. This is the plenary close.